Hey there, guys! Welcome to another episode of Flying Chariots, The Rise. I am your host, Daniel, and tonight I'm with Andrew Christy from the podcast SasqWatchers. Andrew is fascinated by the paranormal and mysterious. And like many others, Andrew grew up with the TV show X-Files. The mysterious atmosphere and fascinating topics have never let go of him ever since. These science fiction scenarios gave him a fear of being abducted by aliens, an idea that both intrigued and frightened him at the same time. Years later, Andrew himself had an intense UFO sighting that still puzzles him to this day. His passion and enthusiasm for the unexplainable has led him to launch his own podcast called SasqWatchers. In his project, amongst other things, he wants to talk to like-minded people whose lives are also shaped by mysterious events. And guys, right after listening to this episode, follow the links in the description and subscribe to SasqWatchers on Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcast, Spreaker, or iHeart. And while you're at it, why don't you take a look at the SasqWatchers Paranormal Podcast Facebook group. But don't forget to show some love on here too, guys. If you like what we do, please leave a like, a nice comment, or a subscription. Andrew, thank you for being my guest tonight. I recently came across your podcast and found it very interesting, especially the first episode where you share your story. I found it very interesting, mainly because I can, partly identify with it. I've also experienced things that I find difficult to explain, but more on that later, maybe. And if you don't mind, why don't you introduce yourself to our audience and tell us what drives you to do the things you do?
Sure, yeah, absolutely. And first, let me thank you for reaching out. I was kind of blown away by it, if you want me to be honest. It's always really cool to see the things that you work on are expanding and reaching other parts of the globe. So it was a cool experience to hear from you. But my name is Andrew, and I created and host the podcast SasqWatchers, Paranormal Podcast. I had to add the Paranormal Podcast part to it because everybody got confused by the name. But essentially, it started out as a passion project that was birthed by a failed attempt at making an Art Bell documentary. And of course, I'm sure a lot of your listeners know Art. He was a broadcast legend who really put the paranormal on the map as far as broadcasting goes. And so I just kind of feel like I'm trying to carry the torch a little bit for Art. And Coast to Coast, which is the show that he had created back in the late 80s, early 90s. I mean, it still exists today. And there's a lot of really quality hosts that still participate. But everybody kind of agrees that, this kind of begins and ends with Art. And there's a lot of podcasters out there who are really putting out good work. And I think it's important that, even though I agree Art was such an influence, that it's time for us to carry the torch, and it's time for other people, I mean, even such as yourself, to kind of get the flowers that everybody deserves for the amount of just incredible amount of work that goes into this stuff.
Art Bell, man, I love Art Bell. And like I told you before we hit the record button, I just recently came across Art Bell like a few weeks ago, to be honest. And I immediately was drawn in to his voice and the way he asked questions and approached things. that was very interesting. And the whole atmosphere of his show, man, it's awesome. And I never had the chance to listen to him on the radio since I am from Germany, as you know. And I found him on YouTube, like I said, by accident. And since that day, I'm listening to the old episodes, and it's awesome. But what do you know about Art Bell? You're a big fan of him, and I know he died, man, and I think he died of medication, wrong medication, too much pills. I don't know
Yeah,
what
yeah.
happened, but
That's one of the things with Art Bell. He had terrible, terrible back pain. Like he had a pretty serious condition, and that was actually something that he talked about, at length, endlessly over the course of his career. A lot of his uh, advertising, even on the show, is based off of that. And I think so. What happened was, as far as his end of life scenario, he was just a bad case of taking too much of the wrong medication or something to try to cope with the back pain. But he is a very, very charismatic person, but also a very mysterious person. Um, he's an enigma, so to speak. A lot of people who knew him personally don't even know everything there was to know about art. And that was something that, when I was trying to do this documentary, that I learned, because I won't, out of respect, name names or anything, but I spoke to some of his children, and even just the difference of opinion about the man from his children's perspective, it was a wild thing to hear. And so it's really important for fans, especially people who still to this day listen, to allow that enigma to still exist. And I'm actually kind of glad in that regard that the project fell apart, because it's a case of maybe learning too much about your hero, and then that perspective is changed forever. So I'm kind of grateful that project stopped, because I'm still able to look at the art that I know versus the art that I may have discovered, if that makes sense.
yeah, interesting, interesting thoughts. Yeah, he seemed like a very interesting guy, very mysterious guy. Yeah, I had the same impression. Interesting,
Yeah,
man.
and oh, sorry.
No, go on.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, like, none of us are sitting here right now if it wasn't for art. So that's something that I really like to reiterate. And as far as podcasts go, I think over the last couple of years it's gotten a lot better. But in the wake of art's passing, like, I think it kind of brought a dark age on some of the things that we're doing now. As a listener back then, it seemed like all of the shows kind of stagnated a little bit, and a lot of them don't even exist anymore. But for really the longest time, it's really just been the last podcast on the left and everybody else. And so I used that opportunity of the documentary kind of falling apart as a way to create my show, because I wanted to create a show that I would want to listen to. I'll endlessly listen to old Art Bell shows, but it comes to a point when, how many times can I actually listen to the episode about Mel's Hole or Madman Markham, the time traveler? I've listened to those 20, 30 times, maybe even more than that. And, they're obviously entertaining, but there are more stories to be told. And I just felt like at the time those stories weren't being told. And what's been really interesting for me, and with the work that I'm doing with SasqWatchers, is I've found, and I referred to it earlier as like this freshman class of podcasts that are really putting a lot of work and effort into kind of creating that atmosphere. And I discovered one, and I know you talked to Tom, but there's the Lost Frequency podcast. And Ryan and Tom are guys that, man, if I discovered that show 2 weeks sooner, I might not even create SasqWatchers, because those guys are putting out a product that is so good and so precisely what I wanted to accomplish that I might have just been content with finding this show and listening to it as they went. But as it is, they're putting out some incredible content just weekly. And because of my own show, I've been able to connect with them. And they are super cool guys. And the stuff that they're addressing on a weekly basis is just so vastly different than the episode that they put out before. And the content is so good. And as awesome as they are, that's not exclusive just to them. So I really am proud of the people that I've come in contact with through this podcast, because that torch that Art lit so brightly is being carried masterfully by a lot of people. I mean, and yourself included.
Oh, thank you. And thank you. And you're absolutely right. The Lost Frequency podcast is very good. I listen to these guys too. Shout out to these guys. You and what I love about our Bells show is that it's a radio show actually, and not only a internet thing on YouTube or so, because we don't have that here in Germany. We don't have stuff like that in Germany. You will not find a show that talks about the paranormal, UFOs and stuff like that here in Germany. It's so sad, man. And I love listening to radio. I'm a big radio guy. I love radios. I listen to shortwave radio and all these different stations from all over the world. And this is very interesting. And I'm a radio guy, and I love that it's a radio show. I would love to have something like that here in Germany. But unfortunately, it's not
that's
the case.
Super unfortunate. That's honestly surprising to hear too.
Yeah. No. Germany is different, man. And another thing one can hear if we listen to your first episode, your podcast, is that that's for you. It started out with interesting show that I also watched, X-Files. Man, I love the X-Files, man. I'm born in the 80s. I'm born 1980, to be exact. And yeah, when I was a young boy, I also watched the X-Files, man. But back then, the experience was somewhat different. Back then, to me, it was science fiction, of course. And now we're watching these shows a little bit different.
Right. You see a lot of the themes and stuff are kind of unfolding in front of us. And not only that, but as you grow and you learn and you kind of understand that a lot of what they had put on that show was actually based on reality, so to speak. Different case files and things of that nature were examined and dramatized on that show. So it is kind of cool to see it from an adult lens, especially because while I was also born in the 80s, I only spent about a year and a half in the 80s. I was born in the late 80s. And so I was a little bit younger when the X-Files was in its first run. So one of the things that always just struck a chord with me in that beginning intro, when that song hits, and then you see that black and white photograph of the UFO. And as young as I was, it struck a chord. And you have a sense of this fascination that comes along with it, the sense of wonder, fear, anxiety. It created a sense of worry to me that I was going to be abducted by aliens. And I did talk about that in the first episode of our show, which I honestly meant to be 15 minutes long. It was supposed to be an introduction episode. It was going to be a short and I hit record, and the next thing I know, I went an hour and like 12 minutes or something just talking. And I didn't think I was capable of doing something like that. But this stuff becomes very therapeutic. I've noticed, not just for myself, but for the people that I've spoken with, that it's it's a very strong therapy session to sit here with a microphone and a computer and to just talk about this stuff. And I'm I'm a person who, I mean, some would argue I had a little more trauma than most kids, and that could have played a role in it. I'm not a psychologist. I I think when I speak to people in that field, I befuddle psychologists, but I don't tend to believe that that anxiety that I had about being abducted was the result of some unknown trauma that I had as a child. And that's something that I'm working through now, that I've been doing a lot more research with our show and having more conversations every single week with people. I'm just taking information in at a higher rate than I ever did before, and it's kind of allowed me a new perspective on that. And I mean, I'm not gonna say, I was abducted by aliens, but I'm open to the thought of having some regression therapy done. And that's not something that I even consider was a thought in my head, prior to this year. But just everyone that I've spoken with has really told me that the intensity of the anxiety that I had and the frequency, every single night I'm this kid in bed, and I literally at one point had to put a lamp, like a full actual lamp, up above my head and turn it on at night just so that I could sleep. And it's not like it wasn't this fear of the dark or fear of the unknown. I was just very thoroughly convinced that the light above my head, I would with that there, I would notice any like being standing over top of me. And at the time I had no rational explanation or reasoning to think that way. And you could definitely say like, well, this kid's just seen one too many movies. I I definitely grew up with horror. One of the first, you know, toys that I had as a child, and it's worth a lot of money now. I actually always kick myself for not having it. Is it was a blue yo-yo with Freddy Krueger on it. And A Nightmare on Elm Street is one of the first movies that I can remember seeing in a movie theater. It was like part five. It was the 3D one, and I actually texted my cousin recently to make sure that that memory wasn't false, because it was so long. I was like 2.5, 3 years old when that movie came out, but I just have this very vivid memory of being in the theater watching it. And obviously with the X-Files and everything else, I was surrounded with this horror and sci-fi media a lot. But I think that there was something more to it, and it wasn't until much later in life that I came to that conclusion, because I was resound to the idea that I was a child with anxiety that may or may not have been afraid of the dark. And I think a lot of people are happy with that explanation, but I just never was. And I don't know if it was when I actually had a UFO experience, a few years ago, that I started to, look deeper into that. But yeah, I just don't think it was just an X-Files episode that, caused that fear. But much later in life, it was 2017. It was July 4th, and I'll never forget it. And right off the bat, when I say July 4th, what do you think? In America, we have the 4th of July. It's fireworks. It's Independence Day. It's just, our celebration for, winning the war against England. And so there's a lot of explosions in the sky. There's a lot of lights in the sky. There's there's a lot going on pretty much everywhere, and not just that day, but it's a weekly celebration at this point. You are routinely woken up 1 or 2 weeks prior or before the fourth to fireworks, and it's a heck of a time when you have scared dogs and newborn babies and whatnot. But if you're not trying to get up at work at 5 o'clock in the morning, it's not that annoying. But I'm digressing a little bit about the American culture. But so I'm at this party and I'm technically at work at the time. I was essentially I'm not sure if you have this in Germany, but there's a program called Big Brothers and Sisters, and they it's essentially like you're looking after younger people that you're not related to. You're a guide to them essentially to help them grow, and some of them are troubled, some of them have sketchy pasts, or whatever. But that's kind of what I was doing. I wasn't exactly working for that company, but it was the same premise. I was in some ways even a caretaker, or a big brother. And I have my client with me, and he was a teenager, and we're at this party, and it's a bonfire, and of course there's fireworks and everything else that goes with it. And it gets a little late and it's time to take him back. And this was in the town that he lived in, which is actually where I live now. And we're walking down the street, and I see this light, and I've come to identify it as basically what's called an orb UFO, where there's a round ball of light, and it just very slowly and casually almost just kind of starts floating up into the sky. And it's floating, and it comes up over the tree line, and I catch it, and I'm like, oh dude, somebody's setting off fireworks. Let's stand here and check this out. Based on that description, there's a firework called a Chinese lantern that kind of does something similar to that. It real slowly kind of goes up like that, and then eventually it pops, and the circumstance behind the firework occurs. But this didn't happen, and I would say the size of it was significantly bigger than anything like that as well. So it just kind of floats in the sky, and I was befuddled. I was so confused by it, and we're just both standing there staring at it, and we're trying to figure out when is the boom? When is this going to explode? And it just never does. And we're just watching, and we're watching. And at this point, I'm starting to think in the back of my mind, well, I don't know, maybe that's not what it was. Maybe it's somebody's playing with a drone or something. And pretty much no sooner than I have that thought, it, I guess, breaks away into three separate orbs of light. And so there's the center light, and then there's one on either side of it. And so now there's three of these orbs of light. And things just got a little more interesting, because now this is clearly not a firework. And then they start to move. And I think in that first episode of SasqWatchers, when I described this, I referred to it as ballet, because they started to almost dance like around with each other. And eventually they're doing what I would say is a figure eight pattern, but it doesn't stick to that. I think some skeptics would say that this could have been some kind of light show, and that it was on this figure eight. And everybody's entitled to their opinion. And I just had a skeptic on our show last week, and he was a fantastic guy. I really enjoyed talking to him. But it's so easy to say something like that, having not been there to see it. To not witness something firsthand gives you that ability to write it off. And I can say with certainty this was not a light show, and these were not drones. And I can get into that further in a second because that's actually part of the story. But these lights are just going and going. And at that point, my mouth just kind of slowly is agape. And I'm not sitting there like aliens, aliens, aliens. Not like, I don't think I ever was, but I started to understand that I was witnessing something special, something very cool and unique. And I was grateful that I got to see it. And I know a lot of people react differently. And I know that child that I used to be, who was terrified of being abducted by aliens, would have been terrified. My children probably would be terrified to see that, but I wasn't. And I talked about this last night with my co-host, and it just filled me with not just a sense of wonder, but encouragement, excitement. It was a happiness that, you really only feel a couple of times in your life. I said, when I married my wife, I had that sense of happiness, just like this warm sensation completely within. The birth of my children, like the happiness that you don't understand until it's happening right in front of you, that this life you created is there in front of you and you have tears running down your eyes because of it. That same feeling occurred while I'm watching these lights. And that's an emotional resonance that doesn't happen from a light show, that doesn't happen from misidentifying a drone. And so this teenager that I'm looking after at the time, he's the opposite of that. He's kind of sketched. He's worried. I wouldn't say he was frightened or scared, but he was put off by it. He was not having the same experience that I was having. So while we maintained, contact with it, and I didn't look away from this ever, we continued to walk. We walked a couple of more blocks. We got to his house. He had a roommate. I had a coworker. And we get there, and all this time, these lights are still just cascading across the sky. By this time, it's less articulate. It's no longer that figure eight, and they're just kind of zooming around, doing whatever. And I have this, old generation crappy phone at the time. So we get back to my workplace, and I run inside, and my my coworker's sitting there, and the other client's sitting there, and I'm like, what kind of phone do you have? And can I have it right now? Because there's something happening outside. Like, I got to show you this. Can we please use a better phone than mine to get a picture of this or a video? And she looks at him, the other client, and she says, it's back. So they were out. They had an outing, and she was, she took him to some store or something. And on the way back, they encountered it. And, while they were driving, they saw it flying over the opposite end of this tree line where we were now seeing it. So they had seen it. They came out, and just four of us stood there in the darkness late on the 4th of July, watching these lights. And at that point, I'm not crazy. I have more than just one person here who's saying that they're seeing what I'm seeing. But four of us are just watching them, and 20 more minutes go by, and finally the lights they stop being so erratic, and they come back together, and they form one orb again. And after that, it just kind of dissipates, and then what little light was left almost shot off. So there's a lot of things going on when it stopped that still confuse me to this day, because it's crazy that I can tell you with such great detail everything that I saw up until the end actually occurred. And now, sometimes I can see it almost blinking and fluttering away. And then other times, I remember it like shooting off, like it took off at the speed of light or something. And because it did that, it appeared to go away at the blink of an eye. So that's the only part that I'm really any bit fuzzy on. And I looked at my clients and my coworker, and we were stunned, and we all agreed that we saw what we saw. And they went in the house and I think tried to forget it. And I just sat there outside. And it wasn't until midnight when I was leaving to go home that I even moved from the spot that I was in. And I just looked up at the sky and wanted it to come back. And when I went home that night, I took some detours so that I could go and drive around the area where I had seen this occur. And I wanted to see if it would come back. And it never came back. So that's my experience with seeing UFOs. I did follow up. I'm not sure. Do you have MUFON where you're at?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So I reached out to MUFON, and some MUFON researchers are more thorough than others, and sometimes they get a bad rap, and I think that's unfortunate, because everyone from MUFON that I've spoken to is very thorough, and they follow up with all of the resources that they have. So I had reached out, and the investigator from MUFON that I dealt with, provided documentation that there's no licensed drone activity happening, and that the size of this event would require a drone operator to be licensed, and that flight, if they were doing it, would have to been recorded and documented. So there was no, I guess the term that I have to say, there was no legal drone operating at the time, and there were no military operations happening that they had on record. And so, drones, I can write those off. I can take those off the list as far as I'm concerned as the witness. And so there's no helicopters, there's no, military operations, and it's documented, recorded. An investigator provided that information to me. So what that leaves me with is something. I saw something. I can't say for certain that I saw a spacecraft. I can't say for certain that I saw an alien being operating those lights. What I can say is I saw an unidentified flying object that turned into 3 objects that then started to cascade around the sky for almost an hour's time, and then returned to one object and essentially obliterate itself. And that, to me, provided a unique sense of happiness that, like I said, I've only experienced a few other times, and it's something that I'm still chasing. It was, incredibly fascinating to see. And you talked about him off of, before we started recording. Preston Dennett was a guest of mine. And Preston, again, everything that I do always comes back to Art Bell, but I learned of Preston through conversations that he had with Art. I think he was on Art Bell's show 3 or 4 times. And something else very unique and cool that I can talk about, some would say related, some say unrelated, is out-of-body experiences. And Preston talks about those as well. But I actually had one. And not at that moment, but once I started to really hone in on a lot of this high strangeness stuff. But Preston talked to me and on my show validated what I saw. He said that, it's always jarring for people to hear, but there's a lot of activity like this happening on the 4th of July. And he said that it is, equal parts that they're interested in what's going on, and you can see these fireworks from where they're at, and there's a lot of explosions and fire in the sky, and that draws their attention. And then also they want to participate in it. So there there was some good conversation with an expert in the field who has been doing this research since before I was born. And I'm not exactly a spring chicken, as they say. I'm in my mid 30s. So that's a lot of experience that this man has. For him to validate me in that sense was special to me, because every time I tell that story, it's prefaced with, look, I get it. This happened on the 4th of July, and I know what you're thinking, but this happened. And so, yeah, that's my experience. It's not the only experience that I have with anything paranormal, but it was the most impactful, and it created this desire to have it occur again. And it's funny, there's a lot of media right now that's focusing on cults, and there's documentaries on every streaming service right now, this cult, that cult. And all of these cults offer these people this idea that something is going to come from the stars, be it, a god or aliens or just some celestial being, is usually used with a lot of these cults to attract people and gain followers. And these followers of these cults are looking for that sense of joy that I legitimately got to occur. So even by proxy of this situation, I find myself empathetic towards these cult victims in a way that I think most people aren't, because I got to experience something that they are dedicating their lives to, just to hopefully fulfill a prophecy or something that can then allow them to have that transcendence. And the reason I bring that up is literally just because right now that's a really big thing. For a while it was true crime and stories of murder on every single streaming service, and for whatever reason the last couple of months this like a cult obsession has been taking over, at least here in the States. And so it was a topic of discussion, and I kind of realized that they are chasing that experience that I was lucky enough to have.
Man, first of all, it's an amazing story of a cool sighting, and I never knew that Preston was on Art Bell's show. Man, I love Preston now even more. We both
Yeah.
like Preston a lot, and we like Preston's work a lot. And now I love him even more. Preston, shout out. Awesome. Yeah, we talked about orbs, and why I love your story so much is I actually know about two guys here in Germany that told me the exact same thing that you told me right here. They saw a orb in the sky, and it separated, and it was with the one guy it separated was two objects, but the other guy, he told me it separated into three objects, and they moved around for a pretty long time and became one again and swooshed up in the sky. So very similar to your story, and that's crazy how stories match, man. No matter where you are and no matter where you're from, these stories are very alike. Same with abductions. And a few years back, I wasn't interested too much in abductions. I thought, abductions, I don't know about that, man. People telling the craziest stories about abduction. I was like, I'm not, no, I'm not buying that. But then I found Preston Dennett, and then I talked to Preston Dennett, and then I watched a lot of his videos. And then yeah, I dove deeper into abductions and read books about abductions and actually listened to abductions or abductees, and they told me stories that matched stories from, I don't know, the 70s, 80s, 90s. And then I thought there must be something to it, man. Something there. This can't just be a dream or something or a hallucination. Something,
Right.
something is going on. Something is fishy.
And from a skeptic point of view, I think something that we run into a lot. I've coined it the dragon problem, and what I mean by that is, we go back hundreds, even thousands of years, and there are people in Europe who have stories and drawings of dragons flying in the sky. And on the other side of the world, there are people who have never made contact with these civilizations, who have stories of dragons flying in the sky. Their ideology is different, but everybody had dragons, and obviously there's literally no actual proof that a dragon existed. So what we have now are philosophers in the science world who will just degrade it to, well, humans just aren't that creative. These people imagine something, and these people on the other side of the globe imagine the same thing at the same time. And that could be true, most likely is true. But that doesn't mean that something happening in Germany right now that is paranormal and something that is happening in Hawaii at that same time that is also paranormal are the result of people misunderstanding. There are too many cases, there are too many witnesses, too many experiencers to just write it off. And that's something that I wasn't quite as skeptical. I don't think I needed as much convincing when I've been having these conversations. But to an extent, mental illness is a thing, and we can't write that off. Some people are mentally ill, and I'm sidetracking myself just a little, but I've spoken to exorcists, demonologists. We have people from all walks of the paranormal on our show. And the first thing that an exorcist does before actually doing an exorcism is they determine if that person is actually suffering or if it's a mental illness. And it's a very rigorous investigation. And once it's determined that they are not mentally ill, then there is a problem, and they go in and they fix it. And I think that same ideology does need to be applied to everything else that we talk about. Does this person have a history of mental illness? Okay, maybe they do. So it's not that we're taking what they're saying with a grain of salt. We're just adding that extra layer of caution so that not that we're duped, but so that that person can be treated with respect and the benefit of the doubt. Because just because a person is mentally ill also doesn't mean that they're not capable of being contacted by a higher being, or what we see as extraterrestrials, aliens, demons, anything of that nature. So I really like to take everybody for their word until I find a reason not to, if that makes sense. When when I'm hearing these stories and doing my own investigations, I treat everybody the same, and I try to ignore the big dragon elephant in the room that so many people will use to write other people off with. And I think that's really important because I think what we do here with the paranormal, and I found it's very cutthroat. And I don't know if it's because there's certain tiers to what we do. You have your TV stars, these para celebrities, these people who go to conventions and have turned this into a living, and absolutely nothing wrong with that. Trust me, you're gonna see SasqWatchers at conventions starting next year. There's nothing wrong with selling T-shirts and turning your passion into something that can pay the bills. If SasqWatchers can pay my bills so I can focus only on SasqWatchers, you better bet I'm going to do it. So I don't hold that part of the paraceleb to any negativity, but the people who are climbing to that are very, very cutthroat. And it's something that I was almost caught off guard by. Every day there's, a new group who is attacking another group because they don't like their methods, or this person only wants to be on TV. And I mean, we say, like, I mean, Zach Baggins, for instance, there's a whole group of people who used to work for him who have created their own path by dogging on the guy. So it goes, I mean, he's probably at this point like the most famous para celebrity. So it goes all the way up to him. And a lot gets lost in translation when the investigators are at odds with each other. And that's kind of my goal. SasqWatchers, our paranormal podcast, everyone that I talk to, all of our counterparts, our contemporaries, that freshman class that I talked about, researchers, other podcasters like yourself. I welcome every one of you, and I want to hear the stories, and I want to talk to experiencers, and I want to hear every single detail the way they remember it. And I don't want to be cornered by what conventional science has to say. And that doesn't make me a science denier. I'm actually quite the opposite. I am extremely scientific in my approach. But when you're dealing with, it's called the paranormal for a reason. It's not normal. And until we have the evidence that can, lay the scientific foundation, we have to allow ourselves the ability to experiment. And that's what really the scientific method is all about. A lot of skeptics, Neil deGrasse Tyson himself, you'll hear every other sentence in his mouth, the scientific method, the scientific method. Ultimately, what the scientific method is research, published, and then disputed. So it's important for the research that we do to be allowed to occur and not written off as woo-woo, which is a term that I've learned recently with that's with my investigations and my conversations. Is I heard one person use it, and then now it's everywhere. It's showing up in Facebook groups, and so, like, I think it's okay to investigate the woo-woo, so to speak.
Of course, it's okay to investigate the woo-woo, but yeah, I'm the same. I love to hear these stories. People contact me, tell me your stories. I would love to hear your stories, no matter how crazy they sound. Not too long ago, my podcast colleague Dustin and we had somebody on, claims to be, reptilian, has a reptilian mind, and the reptilian race are his brothers. I don't know. I don't know what to think about stories like that. I do not have to believe the stories for myself, but I I think it's interesting to listen to, and I think these people need a platform to tell their stories or to connect with others who have the same experience. Because I don't know if it's true or not. Maybe
Yeah, yeah,
I'm making fun of this guy, but maybe he's right. I don't know. Everything is
yeah,
possible in this world. Everything is possible. Since you mentioned exorcism and demons, not too long ago, I talked to this very interesting guy, and you should get him on your show. His name is Jack Chavez, and he told me about something that is called an astral parasite. I think he called it an astral parasite. It's not his idea. He saw it in a book or so, or heard it from someone he's very interested in, and he called it the astral parasite. And it's something, yeah, some bad energy, some bad juju that clings on people, and it feeds off your negativity and your negative thoughts, and yeah, and sometimes he said this mental ill people or people in uh mental hospitals, I don't know, call it whatever you want, are yeah, they have something like a astral parasite who feasts on them, on their energy, and make them ill. I don't know, it sounds crazy, man, but why not? Could be possible. Like I said, everything is possible.
yeah, absolutely. And that I can't remember what number of the episode was, but we had a psychic on our show, and her name was Dr. Rita Luis, and she talked about that very thing. She, discussed that there are, don't quote me, this isn't my area of expertise, but we have like 7 chakras in our auric field, and those parasites are then able to attach, and depending on how negative you are as a person, though that auric field and the chakras are maybe weaker than some other people's. So it's easier for those like astral parasites to then attach to your auric field. And the worse you are like the worse off you are mentally, the weaker those fields are, and the easier it is for them to get through the 7 layers, and it's no longer an infestation, but it becomes a full-on possession by that entity. So
Hmm.
that's something that I've even heard speaking to my own guests. And I mean, it's cool to learn these things and to hear these ideologies, and you're never gonna 100% agree with what you're hearing, and specifically with that reptilian person, it could be, even unless it's a 100% fabricated hoax for entertainment, it could be completely uh, just happening to them, and mentally it's happening to them. And even if it's not the case, even if that person is not actually reptilian, he could find himself in a headspace where he believes that. So even if it's not true, it's still true to him. And so to hear that person's story and allow them that platform to speak and maybe get something off of their chest, that, I mean, who knows? I don't want to get like crazy political or anything, but um, there there's a lot of violence out in the world right now, and it's been building and building and building. And maybe that conversation that person has with you about his feelings that he is a lizard person, that he's reptilian, is the conversation that guy needed to have, not to go to the store with his
Oh,
AK-47.
gotcha.
So I really think that what we're doing, even if we fall into that realm of unbelievability, it's still helpful to some people.
Definitely. You're absolutely right. I think the same. And sometimes you talk to people, and you really don't know, after the episode has ended, you really don't know what to make of the story. I talked to Calvin Parker from the Pascagoula case. Unfortunately, he passed away already. I'm sure you're familiar with that case. Very interesting case, the Pascagoula River UFO abduction case. And man, Calvin Parker, I before I had the chance to talk to him, of course, I knew the story and I knew the book, and I thought, man, he's talking about a female alien with a very long middle finger, and she shoved the finger down his throat, and he was like choking and spitting blood. And he talked about these robot-like aliens that escorted him into and out of this craft. And when you just when you hear the story for the first time and you just find it on the internet for the first time, you think, man, the guy's a nutcase. But then I talked to him in person or on Zoom, and he told me his story, and he was the most humble and honest guy in the world. And he looked at me and told his story. And back then, he already had cancer and he had chemotherapy, and his tongue was swollen. So I was very thankful that he took the time to talk to me for an hour, because it was very hard for him to talk. But he told me his story, and I thought, this man is at the end of his life. Why should he give me bullshit? Why?
Right.
Why should he give me he knows, probably he knew back then, he probably knew he's dying. And yeah, why? I always say, when you're on your deathbed, I think most of us would tell the truth on the deathbed, because you never know what's next. Is there something as I don't know, a judgment day, or God is judging you for your sins and you get sent to hell or to heaven? I don't know, based on how honest you were and what you did. I think not many people would lie on the deathbed.
Yeah, no, and of course, there's the deathbed confession, literally the term that's literally based on that idea. And on the opposite side of that, we will take those deathbed confessions for facts just because it came from somebody who said it while they were dying. Hoaxers, and for instance, people take credit for something because they're dying, and we take that as fact, and that happens a lot with what we do. And that's one thing that I've really been curious about, is the deathbed confession with what we do. How much of that can be really taken at heart, at face value, or taken to heart? It, I just, could that then be the hoax, and it's like the ultimate hoax because you're on your way out and there's not going to be any way to refute it, so to speak. So I think, depending on what they're saying, that really does mean a lot. If a person, he's that sick, like you said, there's no reason to BS you at all. And somebody would probably not take that as seriously, for whatever reason, as if he was in that same condition and telling you that he lied about it.
Yeah. But let's change the topic for a second. And before we get lost in this topic, I want to talk about so much more. You're into cryptids a lot, and you're into Bigfoot a lot. And since we talked about orbs before, I want to know what your opinion is on orbs and Bigfoots, because I heard stories about Bigfoots and orbs at the same time. So orbs appear and then a Bigfoot appears, and then these orbs disappear and Bigfoot is gone too. Stuff like that. Have you heard about stuff like that? And do you know stories about that?
I That's something that I've kind of been learning as I go. With SasqWatchers, I've gotten to a point now where every week I'm having a Sasquatch expert. And the funny thing about Sasquatch experts is they kind of all differ in opinion from each other, at least in the regard. You have the flesh and blooders who, are out purely scientifically trying to prove that you have a gigantopithecus, versus the woo-woos, who are out, and now there's portals involved or orbs, and why is there a footprint, and then it leads to nothing. So unfortunately, I've never experienced a Bigfoot. This all comes from my desire to be out there and experience. And it seems like people who are willing to allow themselves to be open to this sort of stuff. I was not one of those people. I was more of the crypto gigantopithecus kind of people until I started having these conversations. If you're not open to it, I don't think those stories really resonate. And like I said, there's even within the Bigfoot community, there's that disconnect with each other where everybody's trying to prove the other person wrong. And what I can say on the subject is that I think now more than ever, there's something to this high strangeness factor that these ghost lights, as I've heard them referred to, they're there pretty often, and they really allude to the fact that what you're seeing with Sasquatch is not something that is so clear cut flesh and blood. And a conversation I had just last night with the author Joshua Cutchin, he has a couple of books called, there's volume 1 and volume 2 that's titled Where the Footprints End, and it kind of evaluates and examines this phenomena. And he talks a lot about how there is, maybe fairy folk involved with some of this, or that, he doesn't really say that they are the same, but, doesn't dispute that idea either. He's just kind of putting forth some research for us to gauge and make our own opinions on. I wasn't fond of the Bigfoot portal thing until recently, but it's wild, man. You start hearing enough stories from people, and it's just not everybody's making this stuff up. The longest time I thought, okay, so we have the paranormal aspect of Bigfoot. Well, that clearly exists because we don't have a body on a table. People need to keep going. And that was my opinion, that, well, we can't provide that evidence of Bigfoot, so now we have to make stuff up. And I was in that camp. I was in that camp for a long time. And it just kind of blows my mind the amount of evidence that suggests otherwise. Like, I don't know if I'm really leaning towards this like kind of high strangeness ideology that surrounds it, that there's a lot happening at the same time. And that if, you see these lights, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're there because of Bigfoot, but they can be there as a happenstance. They're there for the same reason that you're about to encounter a Bigfoot, that there's this veil, right? And there's this other dimension, and it's just right here. And for whatever reason, those things have been able to cross. And a lot of times, humans find themselves in these situations where they encounter this stuff and they're confused. They don't know what to do. They're not sure what they're witnessing. They're caught off guard. But a lot of these stories also seem to indicate that what they're encountering is also caught off guard. So it's a really interesting concept to try to wrap your head around, but possibly humans are cryptids to these creatures, and they're just as shocked to see us at the same time as we are shocked to encounter them.
Well, that is interesting. Interesting theory. I like the idea that Bigfoots are extraterrestrial beings or helpers of extraterrestrial beings, or are made by extraterrestrial beings. I like the idea more than Bigfoot being a long lost ape or bear or whatever that are hiding from us in the deep forests, because I know these forests are very large and very deep, and I mean they're fucking big, to put it this way. I know that they can hide everywhere, but I don't think. I mean, we know Bigfoot for a very long time now, and so many people are going on Bigfoot hunts and looking for Bigfoot. I think we would have find one at this point. We would have one, or we would have bones or feces or something, some proof that they are a thing, you know. And I think there's something to this phenomena. But like I said, I don't think there are bears or apes or uh I don't know, some long lost ancestor of the humans or whatnot.
Yeah.
I think there are extraterrestrial beings or interdimensional beings. Some people say that these, th- because some people see Bigfoot and they see a UFO at the same time. Maybe they are the theory is there that Bigfoots are doing the dirty work for the aliens, snatching, I don't know, animals or even humans. Missing 411 man. People say, hey, Bigfoot has something to do with it. I don't know. I like the idea more than, like I said, Bigfoot being a bear or so.
Yeah, but then also what you can do is you can look at kind of the Native American approach of Sasquatch, and they they did not um they did not present Sasquatch as this flesh and blood gorilla like creature either. You know, they had um more spiritual nuances to it as well. And so, I mean, extraterrestrial or some type of forest spirit, whatever these things are, I'm now in that camp, like now more than ever. All of the evidence seems to suggest that it is something. It's something on that side of that fence. You know, you're right. There absolutely, by now there should be a body. There's a lot of forest in North America, but we're pretty deforested. That's almost a problem here with how much deforestation has occurred. We're very, very uh, away from that. So can they migrate? That's possible, but everything else migrates too. And have I ever encountered a bear corpse in the woods? I've never seen one, but that doesn't a lack of evidence isn't evidence, so to speak. That doesn't mean that there's Bigfoot corpses out there too, just because I've never seen a bear corpse. So I'm very much in that camp now, and I'm looking forward to learning more. We are hosting a Sasquatch excursion of our own. That's one of the things that we're trying to branch out for in 2024. There is an area in Pennsylvania not far from me that appears to be some kind of hotbed of activity. There's a lot of people who have experienced stuff there. Now, likewise, there's also, according to a park ranger, a lot of hoaxers. And this is part of the field that I wasn't quite prepared to deal with. But my goal now is to do both the Sasquatch excursion as true and morally and ethically true as possible, in the sense that, hey, I'm paying everybody who wants to come out, and we're gonna investigate, and we're gonna spend the night, and we're gonna try to experience something. But at the same time, while that's occurring, we are looking into the area as far as hoaxing goes. And we're going to set cameras up. We're going to, do the trail cam. We're going to basically try to catfish some hoaxers too, to kind of once and for all see what's going on, at least in this area. As romantic as it is to find yourself in the woods and experience something, I think the due diligence that you're that you're taking to prevent somebody from being hoaxed also has some romance to it as well. So we're kind of looking at it from both ends, and I'm not disregarding anything that anybody said, and I really look forward to being out there in the woods. But at that same time, if we're able to catch some people who are um, making light of this thing that so many people care pretty deeply about, that works too. you know um, so that's the other side of that coin with hoaxers is technology is at an all-time high for allowing you to be able to go out and do that. You don't have to work as hard to fool people, and that is unfortunately that's something that happens too. And it's not even so much so a case of mistaken identity, or you know a person sees what they think they see, but there could be a guy out there in a suit, and they're very brave out here because where we live, people will shoot you if you're a giant hairy creature in their backyard. But people have that desire as well. I know a hoaxer personally. He's a wonderful person, and he did it by accident. And he's since stopped and started to use the knowledge that he had to basically do what we're doing. He's coaching me in my efforts to catch some of these hoaxers.
Oh, interesting. Catching the hoaxers. You said you barely find a bear corpse out in the wild. You're right. Absolutely right. I give you that. But a bear has a very big area that he's roaming around, and it's only for himself. So one bear has a very, very big area. But they say that Bigfoots come in families sometimes, and they live in families. And that means they reproduce on a regular basis. And there must be a lot since they're around forever. And there must be
Right.
the same. And I think you had the discussion on one of your other podcasts. I think it might be the second episode. You've talked about Nessie and some other cryptids. And I think the discussion came up. And I also thought that if there's something like Nessie, there can't just be one. At least that's what I think. Well, it can be, yeah, but I don't think so. I don't think that there is such an animal as Nessie, such maybe a prehistoric dinosaur or animal around for a few hundred years. I mean, we have reports of Nessie from whatnot, like 1600, 1700, something like that, or it might be even earlier. I'm not sure, but yeah, very early reports of Nessie, and I think there should be a lot. I mean, and I'm talking about immense amount of these animals.
Yeah. I mean, you're not wrong. Some of the things that we've looked at, and again, I'm not out there in the lock doing, boots on the ground research, but some of the things that we kind of discussed on that episode that I think are plausible are underwater channels, so that there is actually the ability to swim from one lake to the other, through this underground channel of water. And those are things that we know exist. I can't sit here and say that there's actually certainly one in Loch Ness. I'm not a scientist in that area of the world right now, but it adds at least some plausibility to the idea. When we think of the lifespan of these supposed creatures, I look to goblin sharks or sea turtles. These are creatures that appear to live extremely long lifespans into the hundreds of years. So it's not uncommon for an aquatic creature to have a lifespan that far supersedes what we have in the 70 to 100 years that we're lucky enough to live on the earth. So when you look at other creatures, and allow yourself the ability to apply that to this idea of a Nessie, I think some of those things become easier to accept. Now, likewise, we were talking about Bigfoot, and right now, Bigfoot in the field, there's cloaking. That's something that a lot of people have been bringing up. And then you're So now you have Bigfoot. There's no evidence that this creature actually is a physical being. You have like this cryptid already. So now, and we're talking about, we're going to add cloaking to it now. So you have this very hard to believe, incredulous creature, and now it's cloaking. So some people are, they throw their hands up and they're done with it. But if you look at the animal kingdom, we have chameleons cloak, we have octopus, expert cloakers. So it is something that the organisms that are living and scientifically proven on this earth are capable of doing. So through that lens, I think when you apply it to cryptids such as, like a Nessie type figure, it should at least check some boxes to, I don't know, allow yourself to open up at least to the possibility, so to speak.
Gotcha. You're right. And Bigfoot also could maybe live underground in tunnels or caves. I don't know, cave systems, hiding the entrances. I don't know. I'm open for the idea. And I'm also open for the idea with Nessie that she just told me about. It's very interesting. You're right. You should always keep an open mind to all these things. But I think if there's such a thing as Bigfoot, and let's say they live in the woods or underground or wherever, in underground systems, tunnels, I don't know. I think there might be pretty intelligent, different from Nessie. If Nessie is a dinosaur that survived somehow, probably has the brain of a walnut, and
Yeah.
hiding for so long and fooling us for so long, for probably hundreds of years, fooling us. I'm not sure about that, man.
Right. Yeah. For me, the lake monster thing until recently was the hardest to digest. And just looking at Loch Ness when so little evidence exists. But over here in America, we have actually quite a bit. Pretty much every Great Lake has their own their version of that, which I just discovered when we were doing our show. But earlier we talked about some of the high strangeness that is occurring, and if Bigfoot or these ghost lights or even a dog man or whatever we're experiencing can then be interdimensional and somehow cross that veil, why couldn't we then also apply that theory to what these lake monsters are? And they're there, people see them, but they're not living there, so to speak, and they don't have to be this creature that's lived for 6,000 years on Earth undetected. And they're there, they're briefly, they've crossed that veil, and they've returned, just like what we discussed with Bigfoot earlier. So I think it's important when you're dealing with some of these paranormal things to apply apply the ideologies to everyone. It's got to be a blanket or an umbrella, so to speak. If I'm willing to sit here and accept that Bigfoot is an interdimensional being, and then I should be willing to accept that the Loch Ness monster is also an interdimensional being.
You're right. And with all the skepticism I have for some cryptids, not all, some cryptids, we always have to keep in mind that people allegedly saw them. There are many reports of people that said, I saw this fucking thing.
Right. Do you know the surgeon photo? The real famous photo of Nessie that's coming up out of the water. It was deemed a hoax. And if you look at it, I agree that it's hoaxed.
Mm-hmm.
But the surgeon who took the photo and released it never attached his name to it. It's called the surgeon's photo for a reason, because the man who did it kept his identity a secret. And we talked about deathbed confessions earlier, and the doctor who made the deathbed confession about that being a fake hoax photograph was not the person who did it. He claimed that his friend, and I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but he made the claim that his friend, who was the surgeon, told him that it was a hoax. So ever since that occurred, I think I was late 80s, early 90s when this guy had died and made that claim. And everybody just wrote it off as, well, this is a hoax photograph now. To me, that I look at that photograph and just what I know about photography and perspective, and it's clearly, I think, hoaxed. But I think it also adds an interesting dichotomy that a person who wasn't even involved in the hoax says it was a hoax, and then colloquially everybody agrees, well, that was a hoax. And so it's funny because I also agree that photograph was hoaxed, but I put those feelings aside so that I can apply that scientific method, so to speak. So I can look at all the evidence and what's stopping that guy from making some shit up when he's on his deathbed. And now just everybody goes along with it. So that being kind of like the big tent pole, so to speak, of early Nessie evidence being written off, I think allowed a lot of people to then write everything else off, which isn't the way to go about it. And, you know, if it was an eel, if it never existed, if it's an interdimensional being, until there's evidence to say one way or the other, I have to remain open to the idea. If I'm in the court of law, the burden of proof isn't on the defendant. It's on it's on the prosecution. So when I apply that to the paranormal, I feel like a skeptic should be just as burdened with proof as the claimee, so to speak.
Yeah. I don't think that Nessie, if there's such a thing as Nessie, is an interdimensional being. I think, yeah, interdimensional beings, they might have an agenda, doing something, have a reason to cross dimensions and not just to swim in the fucking lake and stick its head out, but I think it would have an agenda and do something. So yeah, I don't know, but that's just my thoughts on it.
I could get real crazy here, and we could talk about time. Okay, so with time, you have a lot of theories behind what time actually is, and you get into like, is time travel possible, and that sort of thing. You kind of look at time is happening at the same time. So the past, present, and future are all occurring on the same plane, right? So is it possible that here we are in this center plane being the present, and then the past is down here, the future's here, and we're just colliding? And so what we're seeing actually, what we're considering interdimensional beings could actually just be resonant from the past. Is Nessie maybe just an actual dinosaur that for that brief moment in time was able to cross the planes of time, and by pure sheer accident there was some crazy barrier in between our planes of existence that just kind of disappeared for a second. And when you look at it that way, then maybe Bigfoot actually is a Gigantopithecus, because perhaps these Bigfoot sightings are also the result of our times kind of colliding with each other. And you get into the UFO phenomena, and if the past and the present are occurring at the same time, we can't forget that the future is also happening at the same time as well. So maybe these UFOs are the result of what we're actually seeing, future us, so to speak. And I again, I'm not an expert on this by any means. I'm terrible at math, but I'm pretty sure it was Einstein's E = mc² theory of relativity that suggested everything was occurring at the same time. So, based off of that theory of relativity, I'm that's also a possibility, so to speak, that we're actually just kind of witnessing little blips in time at the same time.
Hmm. Yeah, that's interesting. A lot of people think UFOs or aliens, reports of aliens, they're talking about time travelers, us from the future, stuff like that. I don't know if I like the idea, but I find it very interesting. Also, find your idea very, very interesting. But I do think that aliens that are here that we see in the sky. I also, when I was 16, I saw a triangle-shaped UFO in the sky moving like crazy, man. Like, it moved very, very, very crazy. And I do think they're from another planet. I know. I don't know. Think they're very far ahead of us, like millions of years maybe. But I don't think they're from the future or so. Could be, but I don't think so.
It's
Um,
kind of the beautiful thing about what we do, though, is like you just get to ponder these things and take in everybody's ideas and theories, and this it's a it's really amazing to be able to hear these things and then apply it to your own beliefs, and or to figure out how to maybe discredit something. It's super cool. Like I don't know one way or the other about anything that we've talked about, but it's sure fun to theorize about it.
yeah. I want to tell you about a German cryptid. And I think it's also famous in French in France. Um, it's the Tatzelworm. Have you heard of it?
um I'm not 100%. There may have been an episode of Expedition Unknown about this. Is this kind of like what we see in the film Tremors, essentially, with like an underground?
It's a little bit, yeah. I will show you a picture, and we will describe this creature for the audio-only audience. Let me share the screen right now. Yeah, you should uh, you should see it now, right? Oh, there we go.
Okay, yeah, that's completely different than what I was.
That's a picture
Uh,
of the Tatzelworm, um, a cryptid. Yeah, might have existed, maybe, maybe not. I'm not sure. This it's not a painting. It's more a drawing. It's made by Johann Scheuchzer in 1723, and it shows a man that is afraid, very afraid, of a creature standing in front of him that has the head of a cat. I would say a cat, the head of a cat, a long neck, a very long neck, and claws like a eagle, elongated upper body, and the legs. I would say the legs of it looks like chicken legs or something like that, or bird legs, and the tail of maybe a rat or so. And this is the Tatzelworm. They say they live in underground. I think they live underground or between rocks and stuff like that. Some reports say they were pretty small. Some say they were big. And you could say it almost looks like a dragon. It almost looks like a dragon. There, I have another picture. It's a little bit smaller, but maybe I can.
okay, that looks far more. The
Yeah,
one on the left there looks far more cat-like.
yeah. It looks like a cat. Guys who only can listen, sorry about that, guys, but it's important to show this picture uh, to my guest. Yeah, it looks like the upper body of a cat, and it has an elongated uh, uh, body, almost like a snake, and it attacks a pig, tries to kill a pig, and maybe eat it. I don't know. The On the picture on the other side, the creature has the head of a snake, the tongue of a snake, also a long neck, and again these chicken-like or bird-like arms and claws, and also the body of maybe like something like a snake or a. All in all, it
Yeah.
looks a little bit dragon-like. You could also say maybe it was some kind of a dragon. Some people say they had venomous fangs. Some people, yeah, like I said, say they're pretty big. Some people said they're small, attack people that wander around, and sometimes kill them, eat them, or yeah, take them with them. Yeah, let me stop the screen share here. Interesting. It's the
Yeah,
worm. Interesting cryptid.
I've never heard of it, and I'm going to add that to my list of things to look up for today. I um, just heard about some dogmen activity that's literally happening in the county that I live in, and it's the first I've heard about it. So I'm creating this. I don't know. It's a little journal of things that I want to take a look at for maybe some upcoming shows. I I don't want to say I'm obligated, but I joined a network and they like live shows. So in addition to the two shows that I do weekly, I'm adding a monthly live episode. This month we did a Mothman episode on the anniversary of the Silver Bridge collapse, and some people might find that morbid, but for whatever reason, I like to find anniversaries or dates, special dates to like coincide with what we do. So on December 15th, we did that. And I just by happenstance was able to get, not just an expert, but, an experiencer from that time period on the show. So some of the things that I'm learning about, especially this, may end up actually being episodes that we do on our live broadcast. And that's a very interesting looking creature. And I'm actually kind of shocked that I've never heard of it, because some of the more, I mean, not to say that that one is outlandish, but some of the more outlandish things are kind of where I fell on. That was my wheelhouse for a really long time, was like the super weird stuff.
Yeah, I will provide you with a few informations about the Tatzelworm so you can do your research. But Andrew, unfortunately, we're running out of time. It was a very interesting talk that we had together, and I hope we can do this again. I would love to invite you back on our show, maybe then together with my colleague Dustin, who couldn't be with us here today. Thank you again, and guys, check out SasqWatchers, the SasqWatchers podcast. I will add the links to the podcast subscription here. And you're on Spotify, you're on Apple Podcast. I think you're on iHeart. I think I said it in the intro. And what was your Facebook group called again?
Our Facebook group is called SasqWatchers Paranormal Podcast. And that was something that I actually added the Paranormal Podcast to the title of the show after, because for whatever reason, some people had gotten a little confused as to what SasqWatchers was. And like you said, we're on like all of those platforms. We have a YouTube channel that I'm trying to grow, specifically because not just because we do our vodcasts, but because we have a lot of stuff up our sleeves for the next several months. I can't even really reveal a whole lot of information about it, but we have a cryptid documentary that we're filming in January. I'm driving to Ohio January 5th to go out in the cold wilderness and do some investigating, and we will have a full documentary up on our YouTube channel based on that investigation. So lots of content that we're trying to get out there. In the meantime, if you prefer to watch your podcasts, we put everything up on YouTube as well.
Okay, there you have it, guys. Big things to come. So go to Andrew's YouTube channel and hit the subscribe button, guys. And do the same here, if you will. So, Andrew, please stay with me for 2 more minutes, okay?
Yeah, absolutely.